5:00 p.m. Thank you guys very much for coming. Can you believe it? We've made it. Yay. You've accomplished so much. So I'm not going to do introductions. I don't think we need to do introductions. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 of our science teachers. We have Miss Weiner from Liberty Elementary School representing as a principal. I have somebody maybe jumping online. Janelle's jumping online, and Johnny will be walking through the door anytime. So our purpose for tonight is that we are really going to discuss and recommend a final product to our governing board for approval. And you all were able to pilot both of those products. So I'm going to move on to agenda item 1.3 and show you a little bit of feedback. I do want to let you know that for the 60-day review of public feedback, we did not receive any. So here is the form that is blank that I am showing you. There was no public feedback on the review of STEM scopes or Open SciEd. But you all had a great review of both products. So what I have done here, and we'll go through this just a little bit, but what I've done is I've color coded it. So if you gave it an extensive review, it shows green. If you gave it an adequate review, it shows in yellow. And then if anything was considered inadequate, it's going to show in that pinkish red that's showing up on the screen. So I thought first we would start by discussing Open SciEd, which is the first round of data that I'm going to show you. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so that you can see it kind of at a glance first, right? So a couple of key things that just wanted to point out to you from the data collected from all of you in the teacher review, the unit coherence for Open SciEd had extensive across the board. So that's that very first column there. The multiple science domains had both extensive and adequate. The math and science content being integrated had both extensive and adequate. Relevance, again, had both extensive and one adequate for relevance. But yeah, as you can see with the greens, extensive far outweighed the adequate in that subcategory. Student ideas, I think was 100% at extensive. That's how you all rated it. The next category was building progressions. So really identifies and builds on students' prior learning and 3 dimensions. That one had both adequate and extensive, but leaned a little bit more towards the adequate than the extensive. So I want us to dig into the comments for that one. Teacher and support for the unit coherence. Again, more extensive scores and then 1 adequate. Scaffolded, I think that one had a little more adequate than extensive, and we'll talk about what some of your comments said on that one. The final one over here is coherent assessment system. More on the adequate side and 1 extensive. Opportunities to learn had a higher rating of extensive and then a couple of adequates. And then I just tallied them up for you so that you could see. Let me get this a little bit nicer for you at 100%. I wanted you to know how many scores total for Open SciEd were at the extensive score of 38, an adequate score, your totals numbered 2, and then inadequate, no one rated any of the indicators for Open SciEd at inadequate. Okay, so that's just high level for Open SciEd. I want to do the same thing now for, goodness gracious, STEM scopes. Sorry, juggling just a couple of adoptions in my head right now. Not many. Okay. So one of the things that you are going to notice here, well, let me just ask you, what do you notice here in comparison? And if you could use the mic, that'd be great.
I noticed there's a lot more inadequate indicators.
Yeah. So this in rating, right, or in evaluation scores only, just when we're comparing them at face value, this definitely seems to have some concerns with it in the red ratings of inadequate. So one of the things that stood out to me, a couple of them that I'll just go through, over here on scaffolds, there were a lot of comments on rigor, right? That this was not a rigorous enough resource for your students. Now, that does not break my heart, just so you know. When you say that, I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, because we want to expose our children to high levels of learning, and if it is a lower level resource and it's not rigorous enough, I don't know that that's going to set them up for success when they are taking AASA or AZ-Sci, which is of much higher rigor. Couple of other things that just stood out to me as I was looking through this. So scaffolding for sure. Some unit coherence. There seemed to be some comments on it maybe wasn't as coherent as you were wanting it to be from unit to unit. And then let me just scroll over this way. And again, you'll just see a lot more of the inadequate ratings of the 6 teachers that were piloting. Let me give you the overall results on that one. So overall results of overall results of STEM scopes. There were 10 extensive scores, 21 adequate scores, and 29 inadequate scores. So on paper and in scores, it looks like you have a front runner. But I would like to hear just some strengths and concerns of, you know, that maybe you want to bring to the committee to help us make our final decision here tonight. So is there anyone that would like to speak about the differences between Open SciEd and STEM scopes and what they had to offer your students during the pilot?
Okay. So strengths of Open SciEd. Okay. Open SciEd has a storyline, and so the unit itself is very cohesive, as it takes the students kind of through this storyline, and it's kind of interesting to look at this because when we talk about scaffolding, like originally I might have said adequate in the beginning, and now I would probably change my score to extensive because I'm still working on that. I'm still doing that unit. And I have seen so many changes in my students with, like, because we were kind of struggling at the beginning with it because it's very rigorous, and there were a lot of new things and a lot of new things for me as a teacher too, and how to structure that. And now that they're getting it, and now that we're seeing those scaffolds in there, kind of as a science teacher, I remember last week, and I can't even think about what it was, but I remember like, oh, that's a great way to scaffold that. Like, why didn't I ever think of like to do that? But it had it in there, and I was like, oh, this is a great way to like build this skill that they were working on. And so I really love it. I love that it's matching up with some of the training we're doing as well. So at our last training, we learned this strategy called I squared. And then last week, that I squared is built into this unit. And I was like, oh, well, I know this strategy because we just learned it in training. So that was really awesome too. So it is, I don't don't know. I am really enjoying it. I think it is definitely rigorous. It is definitely cohesive. It is definitely making my students think. So that would be my strengths for Open SciEd.
Others?
I would agree with everything that Christy just said. And I would also like to add the literary text that Open SciEd uses for their program are more based like scientific journals. So I feel like they do a much better job of preparing students to be scientifically and data literate than anything else I've seen. So I think it's a huge advantage that Open SciEd has over anything else that I've seen in terms of preparing students for the future.
As Christine was talking, I have a lot of the same sort of feelings about Open SciEd. I noticed that it instantly, like I'm thinking of, we did a genetics unit, but their opening phenomenon was so engaging for even my highest kids. So oftentimes I run into the trouble of they're like, oh, I've been there and done that. Just to compare, like the opening anchor was like this extremely muscular cow. And my kids are just like, all their only background is like diet and exercise. And they're thinking, how did this cow, they just couldn't wrap their minds around this. And it was amazing. Whereas I did kind of the same unit, but in the STEM scopes, it opened up with like, 2 different colored eyes, which isn't as like, I mean, they've seen that. And they could explain that. So what I really love about it is going back to like, it feels like there's continuity between what we're trying to implement and it marries the curriculum. And it kind of does it in such a way that I don't really even have to be fully competent yet in that new model of kind of teaching to embrace it and to like do it. And then you just get to see the fruit of it. And so I loved it. My kids loved it too. I asked them, I told them we're piloting and this is for you and for future, 8th grade classes. Like, let's be really honest. Tell me what you're thinking. And I'm like, I'm following everything they want to do because it's different than how I would. And they just they did. They really liked it. They were engaged. They liked the activities. They liked the hands-on parts. They loved the articles, like you said, being actual articles, not just, level sort of reading. So I really enjoyed it.
Anybody else? Strengths of Open SciEd?
I agree with everything that they said too. I also want to add, because I didn't hear if you mentioned it, Christy, when I walked in, but the organization of the teacher resource. And then I found myself using the examples that they've provided inside of the teacher background to help me understand the level that I need to get them at. Because I think for me, it was a learning opportunity for me to see where I should bring them. And some of the stuff I wasn't sure about where they were going in it, but they gave you a picture, a literal picture of something, and you could draw the picture as is and just be, and the kids don't know any the wiser, and or there were a couple times where I had it tacked up onto the board and I was just copying it as we went because it was something that was really helpful. And I straight out told them, like, this is great. I'm going to use their example because their example is awesome. And they didn't care. So it was just very easy for us to follow. And then with the strategies, it wasn't blind. We were going in with some background knowledge, even I think for anyone who hasn't been teaching for a while. So a new teacher could use it with some training.
Any challenges or concerns that you had with Open SciEd? I think when you first put your comments in, because it was rigorous, some of you thought, "Wow, this is rigorous. Is that a challenge for our children?" And then you piloted something else and thought, "Well, that's not right." So, any challenges?
I definitely can see, but so I don't know if this, The challenges that I think I was finding are that it's exposing gaps that my kids are like, that I like, because it provides the scaffolding. But what do you do when they're like below the scaffolding? Like, because like, I mean, it came up actually last week that my students are still struggling with like the criteria for what is a living thing and what is a non-living thing. And like I have a book that gives me, like, they have a K2 misconception of what's living and non-living, and I mean they're 7th graders, so like, you know, like we're having to like, so some of that is coming out, and you know, and so like how do you address that? But so that those are, I think, are some of the challenges that are coming up, but that's not a challenge of the actual resource. I would say two things I kind of it is hands-on and it is engaging and my students are liking it, but there are some things in my unit that I wish were a little more hands-on. So like we looked in the microscope, one of our very first thing, it had pre-made slides. We looked in the microscope, but then the slides after that, there's a digital microscope or there's pictures from and so I would really like I would have liked to have continued, like, and I've already started looking at, well, how could I just purchase those slides that were were part of that, like because they looked at blood cells, but then the nerve cells were just pictures. Or there was a cool digital microscope though, that so if you didn't have microscopes, they could go on and they could adjust the focus on their Chromebooks and stuff. So that was cool. We used that feature. So that is one thing that I wish that sometimes there was like a little bit more hands-on, but I think that those are things that as you become familiar with the unit, you could potentially, you know, adjust. And I guess the other question I would have in terms of the kits, if this is something like the one kit that I had where we were going to look at the blood cells under, they gave you like, because it was supposed to be like stations, and so they only gave you like, I don't know, 6 slides. That was what came in and like I don't know if there's a way to adjust it, because like it was fine because it's my small class, but if I'm at my class of 38, even 6 that's not it's not enough. So like I don't know how to, like, is there ways to adjust the numbers of what, so that some of the materials, like how to get more materials, or just maybe how to make a few things, and it might just be the unit I'm into, because it's about the human body and cells, but we have microscopes, so it would be nice to actually have the slides versus just always the pictures.
Other challenges regarding Open Syed?
I would agree with Christine because, the one that we piloted, we didn't have any hands-on activities with it. It was very challenging in the discourse and the discussion that we were having, but the hands-on part was not there. So, but the kids were engaged, and we had some good literary works with it. But yeah, we didn't have a lot of hands-on to supplement with it.
I was going to add on to that because I was looking at things like that. Sorry. And there was something that came up in the cells unit where they talked about systems, and it referenced 2 other units that they had done. And I wonder if that unit you did was just prepping for some other way to build into, because I was looking through a lot of the other units and it seems like they spiral. And so I wonder if just by luck, that one just was more of a literary type, being able to help them read scientifically. I didn't look, but that's a challenge that I saw, was just understanding their pathway. Because there are going to be units we don't use. One of them was called cup design, and I was really intrigued, so I was going to look at this one. But I'm wondering, that might be a challenge for us to look through and see if some of them don't meet our standards, but might have a skill built in it that we just might look at just for an engineering principle or something, but nothing else. I don't know. But that was a challenge we're going to have to dig through that I saw.
So I watched the webinar that went with my, because they all have a webinar, and so I watched the one that went with my unit. And at the beginning of the webinar, they had and it's been a while now, so I'm gonna try to remember, but like they had a layout, because obviously they have a 6th grade like sequence, a 7th grade sequence, an 8th grade sequence, which obviously don't match with Arizona because of our crosswalk. But like the unit I'm doing, because that was some of the things with the skills, the unit I'm doing is supposed to be an end of 6th grade unit, and they address that in the webinar about, well, this is the end of 6th grade, they haven't had any life science, but they should have XYZ. Like, so when they were talking about some of those like skill building things from the science and engineering practices and the crosscut, like that they should already know how to, like they were expecting them to already know how to develop a model because they would have done it, you know. And so there is some of that in there.
I do think with any program we choose, we are going to need support from the vendor to help us with our pacing and scope and sequence, because it is more aligned to NGSS standards, which we know. And then again, we're kind of wild west with what we have going on. And we're going to want to make sure that we don't duplicate units that might be for 7th grade, but it's actually taught because it aligns with a 6th grade standard. We're teaching it in 6th grade. Okay, let's move on and talk about STEM scopes. Any strengths that you would like to share in regards to STEM scopes?
Well, with STEM scopes, it was opposite for me. For then Open SciEd, we had like 2 hands-on activities back to back, and then they lend into a CER. So, but the background knowledge I supplemented and found other things to put into it. So Open SciEd was very fluid, and it challenged them. And then, but then the STEM scopes, my kids really liked the hands-on portion. So, and they did like the natural selection of different beaks, and we got into Darwin's finches and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of the pieces I picked up the background for them.
I'm not going to make you say strengths. If anyone has anything else to add on STEM scopes. What about challenges of STEM scopes? We talked a little bit about the rigor right off the bat. Were there other challenges with STEM scopes?
So I think one of the things that was disappointing to me was that they've labeled it as a 5E, but that is not what I have been taught as a true 5E. They have an explore, but here are several activities that could be explore, and they just seem loosely, and then they're missing the background, and okay, now here's the explain, and same, I don't know, it's not what a true 5E is intended. It's labeled that way, but
once you got into teaching it didn't feel.
I had to start supplementing right away. I had to go to Gizmos right away. And I was trying to figure out, because once again, I jumped right in, and I asked them that when we had our first meeting, like, I'm trying to figure out what my kids are supposed to know or not supposed to, like, where are they supposed to be? But yeah, it's not what I would consider a 5E, and so it didn't seem cohesive. It just felt like we were doing a string of activities, and then I was, okay, we're supposed to do this activity, and now, okay, well, I'm gonna have to build some background, so now I gotta go find something to like structure this.
I felt like this never happens to me. Like I usually can, like I overplan, and I was plugging what I thought would normally take like my time, and I'm like 20 minutes left. Like it felt like my kids could just breeze through it without really thinking deeply at all. And it didn't really have anything else for me to pull on to get them there. And it did seem very much so like compared to Open Syed, they were making discoveries and figuring things out without me just telling them. And this felt very much like, here's a Punnett square. Here's how you fill it in. Watch me fill it in. Now you do it. It just, yeah, it kind of landed flat and felt like they didn't get to, there were no aha moments. It was just like, okay, we memorized that. Now what? So yeah.
Lower level DOK. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I was doing the cells unit, and the very first thing we did was do a prior assessment, which was fine. But they already did well on it. It was like we didn't need to teach the unit at that point in time. And so then something else I had given them, I think they were categorizing living and non-living, which I enjoyed that because it was asking them then, can you make a rule? Which was great. That was perfect because it had them go through and like what causes these to be in this category, what causes, but then they already knew the answer. Like they knew what to write. And so I did the same exact thing happened to me. I was like, oh, okay, now what are we going to do? And this was where I had an issue was I had 4 worksheets copied. We literally went through 4 worksheets and I still had time left at the class period. I did. The same exact thing happened. And so I was like, oh no, this is not good. So anyway, can I tell you what I did? Am I allowed to say that? Where I supplemented, but I supplemented a whole different direction. Okay. So then I emailed Natasha in a frantic because I wasn't very happy that I had a stack of papers and my kids already knew all the answers. And then I stopped using it and I used the cells unit from Open Syed, and we are like having so much fun. We're looking at chicken wings and doing all kinds of cool stuff. And so what I had emailed originally was the rigor wasn't there. And even though they have gaps and they've learned something over time, and there was a gigantic gap between what they could do things, but we needed to push them in the other skills. They have some basic skills, but they don't have the higher level version of it. And it's a total difference. STEM Scopes to me was a book that we were just going through. And then, yes, we are going to have a gap if we choose the other. But I think by the end, like I'm in the middle of it already and we're already rising to that. I can see the kids doing it. So, yeah, that's what I thought. The challenge was just, I felt it was below grade level, I think is what I had mentioned. So.
We were getting ready for a quiz this week on the STEM scopes, and I was going into the assessment pieces, and you can create your own. And then the one that was already created, I had looked at it, and it gives all the DOKs, and they were all at 1 and 2. Or if there was open response, it was a very still at a DOK 2 and not very. It wasn't challenging enough. So, and it was very simplistic when I even looked at like what was their answer, thinking it would be, more of a paragraph, and it was like 2 sentences. So I was like, okay, so that's what I imagined it was going to be, but it was,
Okay, so I am going to move to the next agenda item because I think we've talked about strengths and challenges of each of the pilots that you had, so both Open Syed and STEM Scopes. And our next agenda item is to come to a consensus on a selection of a primary instructional resource for 6-8 science for next year, maybe even sooner if we order, to recommend to our governing board. So I would like to open it up to you all to make a recommendation.
Can I speak for all of us? We'd really like to recommend Open Syed.
Can I get like a thumbs up or an I can live with that? Absolutely not. What are you thinking? Yes? Yes. Okay. So I think we've come to consensus on Open Syed. I just want to personally thank you for all the work that you have put into the adoption committee. I know it's lots of late nights and coming up with a rubric to select the top 2 and then giving me the unit that you would be teaching and hoping that you'd get that right unit and making sure that you were continuing to teach your scope and sequence that you had already planned for this year. And I think you all have made an exceptional recommendation. And which of you would like to help me present this to the governing board? All of you. Fantastic. I may just reach out to you and see if you all would like to. I think they want to hear from you. You know, you used it. We took a lot of time looking at the products and evaluating the products, but to use it and to feel what it's like to use and to know that it's supportive to you as a teacher and engaging and interesting for our students. And then, you know, when teachers say we want something rigorous, that just makes my heart happy. So I just wanted to personally thank you for all of your work with the adoption committee. And with that, is it okay if we adjourn, or are there other comments?
I was wondering about, so this is 6-8. I'm just wondering if there's anything in the future for the younger grade levels, and wondering if Open Syed is something, because I'm like thinking when you go through a math resource, if they came to us having this sort of instruction by 6th through 8th grade would be amazing.
So because we have to stay on agenda topic,
Yes. Okay.
I'm going to table that.
Sounds good.
I say we adjourn, and then I can speak a little bit more about that, if that's okay. Okay, so we are going to adjourn, John, in the back at 5:32. Thank you, everyone.